right, welcome. We're live. Join us for the 17th GraphQL Berlin Meetup. This is the first time we're doing this meetup online, and the last meetup was back in December, so it's really nice to have all of you join us. We have about 10 people already who have joined us, so welcome. We have 3 talks today, and before we get into that, I'll give an introduction to our first speaker. His name is Stefano Negri, and he'll be giving a talk about exposing GraphQL as managed APIs. So a little bit about Stefano. He's a solution architect working for WSO2, and spent a lot of his professional career making applications and systems communicate with each other through different patterns and technologies like messaging systems, ESB, SOA, and API management or protocols like SOAP and REST. When he's not spending time with his families, he loves hiking, skiing, and cooking. So now, without any further delay, I'm really excited to bring you Stefano. And
okay, thank you, Daniel. So I understood we can start, or should we wait till someone joining? Or I think we can.
You can start.
Okay, we can start. So thank you for the wholesome introduction. Now I can share my screen, and hopefully you can see my screen now. So you already introduced the subject. So I will speak today quickly what's the benefit of having your GraphQL services or GraphQL API managed by an API manager. So this is my target. And also here, so you introduced me very well. Thank you again. Here you can find some references of me, so some contacts if you want. Would be happy to be in touch with all of you. There's my email address and my LinkedIn reference. So, let me spend just a couple of words on my company. Even if I will try to keep this speech as more agnostic as possible, nevertheless, I will briefly touch the product that I'm dealing with. So it's a WSO2 API manager. So I belong to WSO2. I joined the company a couple of years ago. I'm a solution architect. So the company is a mixed American, UK-based, Sri Lankan software company. In this, we are API code integration and identity and access manager. We are in the API manager. We are well considered by the analysts, as you can see, and this is the latest Forrester report. And important to notice that we are open source. So at the end of the presentation, we give you the link how to download the product, how to download the API manager, so you can play around it a bit if you like the presentation. So what I want to discuss, I said, why you may need to have an API manager for your GraphQL API. So you are all, I suppose, very expert of GraphQL. You are either GraphQL service providers, or you are a developer of application that make use of GraphQL. Why you need a third component, a man in the middle? What the reason that this API manager can bring some benefits? Basically, the answer to this question is independent of the GraphQL. So the answer, the question is the same, but whether you are REST API or GraphQL API. So basically, you may need an API manager when, for example, you want to expose your business internal capabilities to external partners. So you have your services, you have your GraphQL services, you want to make them available to external community. It can be a partner, it can be a customer who wants to create an application based on your services. That's you may also need to make them available internally. Reorganize how you make you distribute your services internally. So this is something that you usually do, but with API manager, you can do it in a more organized way. On top of this, you can govern your business. You can make some government. For example, life cycle of your services. You can make your service available as a prototype, then you can deploy, you can retire, you can block, you can manage, you can introduce different versions of your services, you can control the life cycle. This is another potential benefit that you can have using API Manager. But definitely one of the most reasons that people are looking in an API manager is to handle security. So you have your GraphQL services, you are expert developing that, you don't want to take care directly of all the matter related to security, to authentication, authorization. And for that, maybe you need a component dedicated to that. So an API manager can secure your business assets in terms of authentication, authorization, or for example, typically has capability to intercept malicious code or malicious query. Another potential driver is to control the access to business, to your business, the access to your business assets. It's all related to quota management, subscription layer, quota management to limit the hits to your API invocation to a certain number, or to make them available via different layers of subscription. And this is the base that you can start monetize your asset on. And finally, you may want to have a component that gives you some insight on what's happening on your services, not only from technical point of view, but from business point of view. Who is using them? How often they use? How many subscribers you have daily or monthly? How many API your team is releasing every month, for example. These are the main driver, in my opinion, that leads a corporate to have to onboard an API manager and to put this layer on top of your backend services. In order to do that, typically an API manager, as you can imagine, has different components. I should cover all these requirements with different components. The more intuitive is a gateway. Typically, people sometimes mix up API management and gateway. It's not one-to-one. It's not that. An API manager component is something more. Of course, a gateway is the data plane, which is put in the middle between the consumer, your application consumers, your application, and your services. Your backend service can be GraphQL, can be REST, can be whatever. And is where the policies that you define for security, for quota, for intercept malicious code, or for throttling, etc., apply. And this, but it's not enough. So an API manager typically different components. For example, you might have another very common component that is always present in every API manager tool is the developer portal. It's a sort of repository, registry of all API. And also, sometimes those are bundled together, but there must be a component, an administration tool where you, an API developer, applies the policies, some security policies, and throttling policies, etc. And then there may be, separated or not, some control plane components, some key manager for managing the authentication, or traffic manager for controlling the traffic, or the component related to business analysis and real-time analysis, etc. Typically, an API manager is structured like this, different components. There must be some differences. The markets and different tools have different architecture, etc. But nevertheless, a classical API manager tool has to have, of course, a gateway. Is a basic component. As a gateway is the proxy where your API invocation are passing through before joining the backend, and where the policies are running. It has to support authentication, authorization of the APIs, functionality for authenticate, authorize the access to your API. And here, typically, now the standard is host 2. This is standard, so every API manager should at least support host 2. Typically, they support other basic authentication, other authentication methods like basic authentication of API keys, but those are the standard nowadays. And then it has to support, for example, typically mutual authentication or some other protocol, but it has to have a component dedicated to authentication authorization. Another important feature is throttling. It has to have some way the capacity to block an API invocation if this exceed a quota, for example, or provide some kind of subscription plans. So provide the usage of your API via different subscription plans for eventually monetization. And here, for example, some components are directly integrated. Some API managers are directly integrated with billing engine for monetization. That can be also a good features. It has to support versioning and API lifecycle, the capacity to provide the documentation, and of course, an important component is the development portal. And finally, all these features must be handled in a friendly, using typically friendly user interface. So you must have, for example, we have a publisher which is used to define the API or import the API definition and apply authentication policy, token policies, etc. So far we have discussed in general API manager and backend services. We didn't discuss of GraphQL. This because managing GraphQL services does not necessarily change this list of drivers that I show you. So they apply to REST SOAP of GraphQL services or API independently. So it's really valid for independently of which kind of backend services you have. But it's important also to mention that GraphQL APIs have a specific peculiarities that an API manager product must take in account. So it's not enough that to have a generic API manager tool, but it should be better to have an API manager tool that has a dedicated features for GraphQL if you have GraphQL services to manage. Why this? Okay, I don't want to talk about the differences between REST and GraphQL to you. You're basically the expert compared to me. But of course, you can easily understand that a matter is make some authentication authorization for REST API, and it's a completely different matter when it comes to GraphQL services. For example, for authentication, you can request to authenticate at API level or a resource level, but this does not make any sense when you have a GraphQL API as a backend. So in that case, you may want to define granular authentication authorization policies at operational levels, because in a single API invocation, you can include many operations. Some of them can be open, some of them can be limited. Can be accessed only to authenticated users. So in that case, you may want to do something like that. And so import an API definition and say for the mutation, for example, you want to enable security. For query, you can enable security for some of the queries, but for some other, you can say, okay, this is open. For this, I don't need any security enabled. Anyone can run the all products operation. Anyone can run a query can submit a query with the all products operations. And the same for authorization. So you may need, for example, to restrict the access to a mutation of a query to a group, for example, to make some sort of role-based access control. There are different approaches. So in our case, our approach is based on the scopes, using scopes. But in any case, there must be a way to say, okay, this mutation operation are allowed only to user that belongs to a retailer group, while for other query, I don't need any kind of role-based access control, or for other, I need that they belongs to another group. So this is a feature that a facility that an API manager should provide for this kind of activities. And the third peculiarity is related to rate limiting. Okay, of course, as you can imagine, it does not make any sense to limit the access of a GraphQL API based on the number of hits per second or per minute, because with a single invocation, you can run a query that retrieve few data on a single asset, or I don't know, some hundred of records coming from different assets. So there must be a more granular control of your of the access to your operation. You can want to allowing some sort of operational level rate limits. For example, like this. For example, you can say that is for this activity, this mutation remove product, you can enable 10,000 transactions per minute or 10,000 invocation per minute. For other, you can put unlimited because it's not really expensive in terms of effort for your backend services. And another component very important is that API Manager tool should or usually have or should have is a sort of query complexity analyzer, something like that. So this can be used for two main purposes. So to protect your APIs and to monetize your APIs. So as you can imagine, you can in a single query you can run very complex. In a single API call, you can run very complex query, and this can lead to misuse of your instrument. So this is can open the door to malicious users that can try to, for example, block your servers with make some denial of services, and via very complex query. Or, for example, if you want to monetize your APIs, you can't monetize. It does not make much sense to monetize your API based on the number of hits. But because with an API invocation, you can retrieve, as I said before, very few data or very complex, make very complex query. So for that, this component is typically based on the query depth limitation or query complex limitation, can calculate the complexity of the query and block, for example, if you want to protect your API, block your request if this, I don't know, the depth is greater than 7, 10, or the complexity is more than 500, etc. At the same time, you can provide a subscription layer based on which limit, for example, you can provide a subscription layer free, but with a query that cannot be deeper than 2, 3 layers, etc. Finally, we have discussed briefly what I want to talk to you about what we mean for first-class GraphQL support. So an API manager tool can provide, can use typically any API manager tool for running your GraphQL. But it's better to have what we call first-class GraphQL support. For example, if you are an API developer, you would be able to use a tool, for example, a publisher, which create a GraphQL starting from an SDL schema. No? So you don't have to edit the operation, etc., one by one. But starting from a schema, you can import the schema and have your API directly created in an API manager automatically. Or, for example, for app developer, you may need some app developer connect typically with the developer portal, and you may need facilities like the listing of the GraphQL APIs, for example, or the searching option. You can make some search based on on the name of the API, on the version of the API, of the developer of the API, or for example, a tag-based search, etc. You may need a dedicated tryout tool. So it's important when you are an app developer, before starting developing your API, maybe try to run the API and see how what is the format of the answer, etc. So to have this facility in the development portal is definitely quite important, and is definitely different whether you have a REST API or GraphQL API. So a dedicated tryout tool for GraphQL API is also a feature that is very, very, very important. And then you may have still in the development portal features like categorization, the possibility to access to a documentation of the API, so the API developer can create the documentation and the app developer can see the documentation of the API to make a proper create properly the app. And for both features like download, the option to download the SDL schema, either in the publisher or in the development portal. This is what we consider first-class GraphQL support and what a typical API manager tool should provide. Okay, before moving to a very quick demo, I have still probably 10 minutes. Here, when the slide will circulate, you can find how you can get practice with our product. So you can download, as I said, is open source. You can download our API manager directly from our site or from the GitHub repository. We have also some Slack channel, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and feel free to do it and to practice a bit on our API manager tool. And yeah, so before going to the question, we show you quickly the product, or in this case, our WSO2 API manager. And as you can imagine, the first component that you come across is the publisher. So the publisher is the component that will be used by an API developer to onboard your API on the API manager and to apply policy. So in the publisher, you have a list of already available API. You can see the status. For example, this is a publisher, and this is a GraphQL API. Then you can create a new GraphQL API starting, as I said before, from an SDL schema. Yeah, at the moment we have just one option to load the file. Use possibly direct the URL, but in this case, I have to provide the schema definition. I have now this famous Star Wars API schema definition. Then you have to go. For the endpoint. I can create the API. As you can see, directly there's overview, some standard information, the context, the version, etc. As I said before, you can create different versions of the same API. And here you can see automatically it loaded the operation in the SDL schema. This is what we call first-class support. And then you can start, once this is done, you can start, here you have the operations, you can start apply the policies. For example, you may say, okay, I want to make this API available HTTP or HTTPS or mutual SSL. I want to enable or disable mutual SSL, provide a certificate. Or, as I said before, you have to specify which application level security you want to implement. So for example, basic authentication or API key or auth2. Nowadays, the API, the standard for the API is API manager auth2, which by the way will be part of the next talk. But you can also say, okay, no, in this case, I want to enable basic authentication. And then you can, for example, another important feature that API manager provides the possibility to mediate the service. So between the application and the backend, you can, for example, filter the message, transport the data, or make some kind of orchestration. This is what we call mediations. And also caching. Also caching is quite important. You can enable caching in the gateway if you may. And then this, you can work operation per operation and either or at API level or operation level decide whether you want to enable security, and you enable the security you define in the runtime configuration. If you want to introduce some kind of role-based asset control or some kind of rate limiting for the single operation. So I can say 10, this only 10 transactions per minute, not more. And yeah, you have to provide the endpoint. I don't remember what the endpoint. It should be this one. And this is the business plan that you can make this available to the subscriber. This discussion I did before, and this is important also the life cycle. So this is the governance of your API. So the moment when you create API, this is in a status created, so no one can use it. Then you can say, okay, I can prototype, or I can publish, and once published, I can demote to create, or I can deprecate, etc., etc. In the case I publish, and when it's published, this now, since now on, this is available in the development portal. Okay, as those two API are public, as you can see in the overview, these API are not public, so anyone can see. But this I can change it, also I can limit the visibility that we have to specific groups or specific roles. But as these are public, anyone can see, also without signing in. Okay, so I can see my API, and I can test it. Okay. So this I can rely on the tryout tool. And say okay, and can see all the things, the ID, title, and run. However, it will fail. It will fail because I said, okay, I enable security. So even the tryout, even in the tryout tool, this is limited by security. So as I enable host 2, I have to provide an access token. So I have to go here, I have to log in as I'm another person, I'm an API developer. And say, okay, I have created an application. This application has an access token, a consumer key, a consumer secret as an access token. And I can say, okay, I want to subscribe to this API. Okay, and subscribe. And then I say, okay, probably this I can generate the access token here, or I can distribute the consumer key, consumer secret to my application developer, and they can create with a command line or with the HTTP call, they can create themselves an access token. But I can also create from here. I can generate the access token. And with this access token, I can go back to my API, try out to put the access token here. And now, if I want to select all field, ID, title, run it. And now I can see the outcome of my play. I didn't apply any specific policy at the moment. I didn't apply any restriction in terms of throttling, in terms of authorization. Otherwise, I would need to create an access token with a specific scope, or I would be limited in the number of the API. And then, yeah, you can distribute as an app developer. You can distribute the consumer key, consumer secret of this application that is enabled to run this API. You can see the subscription. Subscription. So this application is authorized to run this API. So a user can create a token and run this API in a secure, controlled way. And I have still a couple of minutes. Then you can go to, for example, a dashboard. This is the analytics part. You can see details of your business inside. So not only the usage, the detail of, for example, the performance of your API, okay, here is not meaningful because it's just one attempt. But not only the performance of your API, but you can also business overview. So how many subscription you have per API, or yeah, how many hits have been, how many API has been invoked, how many faults you had, or throttle if you have someone throttled, how many subscription you have for your API, and who subscribe to your API. You can have under control your API, the API you created, because you enter the same users that create the API. Okay, I don't want to go further. Eventually, if you, as I said, if you are interested, I will circulate the links. So I'm open for question if you have.
Thank you so much for the talk, Stefano. That was really interesting. We had some questions come in, and the first is, and I'm also curious about this, is this API manager, is it open source? And is it one of those things that you can self-host or have a hosted version by WSO2?
I'm afraid I didn't understand correctly. There was some breaking lines. So, but in any case, the product is open source, meaning that you can download it. You can download from the GitHub public repository, and then it's for that one it's completely free. You can do whatever you want. You can also go build a productive API manager and go to production and use it. The other version, the version that comes from our site, is also open. You can download it, you can use it, but when it comes to going live, then you have to activate a subscription. So there are two versions are identical. The second one is updated more frequently. So the one from our side is updated more frequently. The other, it's update every, I don't know, 2-3 months. But you can download the source, you can modify the code, do whatever you want, and also run it in production.
I understand. We have also another one. Does the API manager work the same as API-G?
Well, yes. As I said, I try to be the most agnostic as possible. What I listed is a list of features of APIs, and then I drag a bit on the capabilities for GraphQL. Functional-wise, they are similar. Yes.
I see. And then one last question. Will it pass the authenticated user to the GraphQL server. So, I mean, essentially, the API manager allows you to introduce an authentication layer, which begs the question, does that mean that if your GraphQL API already has an authentication, how does that work with these two layers of authentication?
There is a distinction of responsibility. The API manager is responsible to authenticate, but the GraphQL server may need for his calculation may be aware who is the user. This is possible. This is possible to send to the server in a format of JWT the details of the users. All the details they are present in the user store. So user, not password, but groups, belongs, email, telephone number, whatever. Yes, this is possible.
I see. Okay, so if there are no more questions, oh yeah, how about GraphQL subscription? Is that compatible?
It is ongoing. So at the moment we support the mutations and queries, and we are releasing the next version for subscriptions.
Okay,
the next version will be subscription as well.
Over WebSockets, I assume, right?
Yes.
Cool. Well, Stefano, thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you.
It was really insightful. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the talks.
Yeah, sure. We'll be here. Any other question? Bye.
Okay, we now have another talk. Let me just get the overlay. Okay, so we now have Ryan Chenkie. Ryan Chenkie is a colleague of mine who's also a full stack developer, JavaScript developer, working at Prisma in developer relations. I'll bring Ryan onto the screen. Hey, Ryan. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So I'll give a bit of an introduction about you. So you're doing developer relations for GraphQL at Prisma. You're also a course author, teaching on subjects ranging from the basics of front-end development to full-stack web security. And you also host the Entrepreneurial Coder podcast. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So up to a few different things, but I think you got most of the prominent ones there in your intro there.
Great. Are you ready to give the talk?
Yep, sure am. I can get started.
Okay. Well, gonna need you to share the screen.
Sure. Yep. Let me see. I'm gonna share right here. Let me know if you can see it. Oh, I have to follow some steps to enable permissions, which I should have done prior. Let me do this really quickly. Chrome, where are you?
So while that's happening, gonna go. We had a lot of comments coming in. Great product from Guillermo Bueno. A lot of thank yous. Very interesting from Hendrik Niemann. And Sakayo. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. We're 43 viewers, and Ryan's screen is ready. All right.
All right. Sorry about that. So yeah, my name, like Daniel said, is Ryan, and working at Prisma in developer relations. I've done a lot of dev stuff in the past that has touched on security and authentication, and that was largely through, in a previous life, I worked at Auth0, and so that was from like 2015 to 2017. I worked at Auth0, and then I did some consulting work after that for a couple of years, and I've just recently started up with Prisma. And one of the things that I continue to do in my consulting work is to use Auth0 as a product, because it really did, from everything that I found, looking, I was a bit biased because I worked there, but looking at the market, it was one of the best ways to get an application protected and authenticated and authorized for your users. And so when I was building applications for my clients, I was always using Auth0. I was always reaching for it. And it's definitely, increasing in popularity as a product, as a way for developers to get auth in their apps really quickly. So I figured I would go through and show how you might do this when it comes to a GraphQL powered application. So the scenario here is we've got this application. This is what I use for a lot of my teaching. A lot of my React security courses use this Orbit application. And this is just like a demo app where users come in and they see some dashboard data and some inventory data. So just, this fictitious kind of application that demonstrates a kind of SaaS product, if you will. And so it's all working with Auth0 now. I've got Auth0 built into it. It's a React front end, it's a Node back end, and it's got Auth0 across the stack. So it's all done. I don't have any slides. I figured what I'd do is I would just kind of do some code spelunking and take a bit of a walkthrough so that you can get a sense of how you would reason about putting these pieces together. So if this approximates your stack, if you've got something like React and GraphQL together and a Node backend, and you're interested in Auth0, perhaps this will be useful for you. And if not, I mean, Auth0 works across pretty much any stack that would be served over the web or operate in the web. So you can use it with many other varieties as well. So what we can take a look at first, I suppose, is this Auth0 dashboard. You would need to get started with an account with Auth0. Auth0 gives you many different options to integrate users into your application. But I suppose one of the simplest ways to reason about it is that they give you a database of users. If you want, you can bring your own database, but you can also choose to use their hosted database to store your users. So in this account that I've got for the demo, I've just got, one user. That's me right now. You need to create an application when you go in. I've got this single page app record here for my Orbit application. So you'll be prompted to do this when you sign up for an account and start the onboarding flow. But you get your application, you get some of the information that you would need for your front end application in this case, which is things like the domain and the client ID. And since we're using an API, you need to create an API record as well. So here is the record that I've got for my Orbit API. So this information is going to go in later to our application code. We'll take some of these pieces and we'll build them in. The way that Auth0 works, it's an OAuth OIDC provider. So the way that they're able to be a managed service for authentication is that they abide by this OAuth 2 spec. And so when your users log into your application and Auth0 takes care of verifying the user's credentials and all that, in most cases, it's probably typical to the way you would want to use it is they're going to send back an access token that can be consumed at your API. And this access token is going to be a JSON web token. If you're not familiar with JSON web tokens, you can get some information at jwt.io about how those operate. But you're going to get a way to access your API, to protect and limit access to your API based on JSON web tokens, which come in the form of an access token. That's what is used in OAuth. And so that's a bit about how you would get started on the Auth0 dashboard. The first place you would probably look if you're in your application stack here, so let's say you've got your React app set up, you've got your GraphQL API set up, you'd probably want to get started in your app.js or somewhere near the root of your application. And Auth0 provides this kind of newer library. It's called Auth0 React, and it's an SDK for React. It's actually really nice. When I was working at Auth0, we had kind of basic JavaScript, a basic JavaScript library that did everything. It served all purposes. You could use it across any kind of framework you wanted, but it meant that you had to do a fair bit of work to put all the pieces together. But with this Auth0 React library, it's actually quite simple to wire all these pieces up, which is really nice. You can see the library itself and all of the particulars about it here at this URL Auth0. So it's github.com/auth0/auth0-react. So you're in your React application, and what you'll want to do is bring in your Auth0 provider. I've got that coming in down here near the root of the application. It's actually right at the root. You pass in your Auth0 provider. You can use that to wrap your application. And you want to get those credentials that we saw over on Auth0 side, things like the domain the client ID, a redirect location. So OAuth, the way that it works is you need to specify a redirect URL so that when users authenticate, they're going to go over to Auth0's domain. And when they want to come back to your application, you need to have something in your allowed list of for your application domain, so that the whole process can know that it's a legitimate authentication attempt and not something that's not somebody trying to be malicious. Things like an audience that comes into play when we want to talk about which scopes to request and which scopes to use against our API. The audience is going to be a record about our API that we want to make requests against. And we want to have certain scopes. I've got a bunch of these individual scopes listed here. These can be thought of sort of as permissions, I suppose you could think of them as. When you start dealing with OAuth, you get into OAuth and OIDC, you get into these fine-grained scopes, these like little permissions that you can hand out to users based on whether or not they are allowed to get at those scopes. And you can manage that all in the Auth0 dashboard. There's this there's this roles area where I've got like an admin and a user level, and I've got certain permissions on these. So in the permissions here, I've got all of these scopes that I've previously created. And typically when we're dealing with scopes, you don't have to do this, but this is a very common pattern. You would say that you've got like an action : the resource that you want to target. So I want certain users to be able to read dashboard data. So read : dashboard, edit : user. I think you get the pattern there. That's typically how you would think about setting up these permissions. And so over in my application, when I request all of these scopes on the initial login, I'm requesting all of them, any possible scope that might exist. But Auth0 is going to take care of knowing whether or not a user should be allowed to get access to a certain scope. So what that means is that even though I'm requesting all these scopes, when a user wants to authenticate, the user is only going to get the scopes that they're actually allowed to have, so that they can't, elevate their credentials or something like that. So over in the application, I suppose we could, take a look. I'm going to log out here, and this isn't going to be very pretty because I don't have it fully set up. Well, I guess I did get the redirect. I was kind of expecting a bigger error there, but I guess that worked okay. So I'm back over at the Auth0 domain that's particular to my tenant on Auth0. And this is a spot where I can log in. This is their universal login widget, which you get right out of the box. Comes kind of prepackaged. You can turn it on and be logging your users in very quickly. So we can log in and we get back to the application. You can take a look at the network tab to see what happens here, especially when I guess I refresh the page. That might be of interest. When I do, I've got this request for a token. And this request for a token, it's giving back a few things. It knows that I'm authenticated. The application knows that I'm authenticated because I've got this session that's alive on Auth0 side. And what that means is that I can request like an access token. I can request that I get certain scopes back, etc. And this process of getting that token will all happen sort of under the hood. It's going to give me back that token that I'm looking for. And the spot where that comes in, and I suppose getting into the GraphQL side of things, this is where you'd want to start to configure your token to go to your API. Typically, I'm sure a lot of us have worked with JSON Web Tokens, or at least maybe seen some things about how they work. Typically, what you'll have is you'll have your front-end application and you'll have your API. Your API is protected using a JSON Web Token, meaning that there has to be a valid JSON Web Token that comes to it before it's going to release its resources. And you need to get that token to the API somehow. And the typical way, and the way that Auth0 tells you to do it, is you send it in an authorization header. You preface it with a bearer scheme. This is a kind of an OAuth thing. You can say authorization header should have a value of bearer and then the access token. The access token comes from a call that we make to Auth0's get access token silently function. So here's some work with React State and using the use callback hook and use effect and all that sort of stuff. We're getting a token. We're getting it silently again under the hood, and then then where it comes into GraphQL specifically, I suppose if you're using Apollo on your front end in particular, in this case, because we are using an Apollo client, you're going to put it into your requests that go to your GraphQL API. So, typical Apollo setup here, but then you would set your context for your requests that go out, and you would augment them with a header that has your access token. So cool. So that's going to send your access token to your API. We can actually see that in our call to our GraphQL API here. The request headers contain this access token. So that's what came back from Auth0 when we got the token silently, and it's now what's being attached to requests that go to the API. So that's half the battle, the front end side of things. It's also important, I mean, it's vital in this case to address the API. And I suppose you could say that maybe this is only a quarter of the battle or even less. And the API side of things is where most of it comes into play. If we take a look over at the server that we've got, this is a pretty typical Apollo server GraphQL API. This is one that's got a set of resolvers, a set of type definitions, as you typically would see with an Apollo server. So there's the type definitions here. And now what we've got built into it as well is GraphQL Shield. If you're unfamiliar with GraphQL Shield, it's this really nice library that does a lot of the work of checking authorization for incoming requests for you. And the way you can think about it is you would, like if you're working in an Apollo setup, for example, is you would have your type definitions, you would have your resolvers, and then you would have sort of a third layer, which is your permissions layer. And that's where you lay out what each resolver has to abide by before it resolves data out. So for our queries, I want to say that my dashboard data, I just want users to be authenticated here. And if they are authenticated, then I can release the data. For others, though, I'm looking for a particular scope. I want the inventory items that are in that inventory page. I want users to have that read inventory scope before that data goes back, and similar on throughout. The thing to note here is that these permissions that you set up, these are all just functions that effectively return a Boolean. So we're just looking for true or false here on these functions. I've got is authenticated being defined here with this rule. Rule comes from GraphQL Shield, helps us to set up this rule where we are able to get information that you would have in your resolver, things like the parents, the arguments, the context, etc. And I'm looking for a user to exist. I want the user to be there to know that my API should consider that request to be authenticated. So where does user come from? That is happening down here when we set up our Apollo server. We are setting up some context, and that's an async function, gets the request, the incoming request that comes in, and it's going to do some work to take that authorization header, that JSON web token that came from Auth0. It's going to take that, and it's going to verify it. So when you get a JSON web token, and you send it to an API, to a backend, if the backend is doing its job properly, it should be verifying that token. And verifying a token consists of making sure that the signature portion is valid against some kind of either shared secret, if you're doing a synchronous variety of JSON Web Token signing, or against a public key set, if you're using an asynchronous variety, which is what Auth0 does here. Once that's all taken care of, once we know that the token is valid, and also take into account there is whether the token is expired. Once that is all taken care of, we can get the decoded portion of the token, which is the payload of the token. And in fact, what I'm logging out down here in the console is the payload of the token. And it's this payload information that can be used now to drive decisions that are made in our API resolvers. I can take things like the user ID, for example. I'm using a Mongo database to resolve out this data, and I've got this user ID that I put here on a custom claim. This user ID is going to be used to go and retrieve certain pieces of information from the database. And the reason that I'm able to just take this user ID and ship it off to my database queries is because I can trust that this JSON Web Token, that the information within it hasn't been tampered with, as long as the token is verified. If anyone tried to modify the contents of a token while it was in flight, or if a user got access to their JSON Web Token and the dev tools, and they tried to like elevate their permissions or something, they wouldn't be successful, because doing so would throw off the signature portion, and the token wouldn't be verifiable here at the back end. So because we are able to trust this information, we can use things like this user ID in our resolvers. I can give you an example of that too. If we go up to our resolvers and we look for maybe inventory items, here is, so this is a query. I'm taking the user ID off of my context, which was that specific custom Mongo user ID. I can show you down here where I'm putting that on. It's right down here when we return our decoded portions of the token to pass along through context. I'm returning the full user object and also a user ID, because there's going to be a lot of cases where I just want this specific user ID off of context. And so now that it's on context, we can go up here and into our resolvers. We can pull it off of context and pass it along to our database queries to get that information. So that's cool. Before requests get to those resolvers, though, we want to use GraphQL Shield to tell our system whether or not the request should even be able to make its way on. And so again, back at that is authenticated rule, that's where we're just checking to see if a user exists at all. In the work that we did there in setting up our context for our Apollo server, if the token was not valid, we would not have a user would just be null. And so is authenticated, this would return false, and that request would not be able to proceed onward. We've got this other one. This is kind of a custom job here where we've got a function that wraps a rule, because we want to take an argument when we use it down here in our permission setup. And so here we're just looking again for it to return a Boolean to us, and we want to check if it has a certain scope or not. Again, read inventory. That's the one we want for inventory items. And when we're looking for has scope, we're just taking the scopes that come in on the user's JSON Web Token, and we're splitting them, because that's a string down here. We want to turn it into an array, and we want to make sure that the user scopes include the required scope. So the scope that we're saying needs to be present on this particular resolver. So this should give you a sense of like how you would start to apply these rules to various portions of your API. GraphQL Shield is really nice because it provides a lot of convenience functions for you. You can start to combine these rules. You can start to say like that two of them have to be present, or one of them must be present, things like that. The other way that people often do this kind of thing, if you don't want to bring in something like GraphQL Shield, is to just take the user off of context. So do the work of putting the user onto the context object that makes its way throughout your GraphQL API that will end up in that context argument. Take the user off of there and just make a check right in your resolvers to say whether or not the user is authenticated. So in this case, I've got this function called check user role, which could take that user off of context, and it could say there has to be certain roles present, or certain like this, certain scopes present. So something like that. You could just run this function right in your resolvers, and that would give you protection like that. Another way to do it, if you're using a schema-first approach, is to come down to your definitions, and then you could create like a directive here, a custom directive, something like has scope. So you could apply some custom directive, and you could say the scope has to be like read inventory, something like that. I'm not sure if this is the way you'd pass an argument. Perhaps you would do it without outside of a string or something like that. But you could apply some directives to each portion of your schema, and you could start to mark off certain fields that should be allowed to send data back or not. So all sorts of various ways to do it. That's sort of aside from the fact that we've now got Auth0, Auth0 working in the API. To get back to the Auth0 part of things, the way that Auth0 is going to work in your API, it's independent of Auth0 itself. You don't need to necessarily be too concerned with communicating a whole lot with Auth0. You do need to communicate a little bit, and that little bit is you want to send a request to this URL, which you are going to get when you do a request. You're going to get this URL when you sign up for an Auth0 account and you have a specific tenant. So we can take a look at this. If I copy over this portion of the this URL, and then I come over here to my Auth0 account, or maybe what I could do actually is do React Security us.auth0.com/well-known. There we go. So here is the key that is being requested on the from the backend when we send a JSON Web Token to it that we want to verify against. So this is the JSON Web key set. This is what Auth0 is going to be. When Auth0 creates an access token for your users, by default, they're doing it in an asynchronous fashion using the RS-256 signing algorithm. And this is the JSON Web key set that's going to be used to verify the JSON Web Token. So that's kind of the limited amount of communication that you need from your API side. This can be cached in your API as well. There's like a caching strategy that says that you want to keep this information around for a little while so that you don't have to constantly be hitting Auth0 every time a request comes to your API. But that's how you set up Auth0 on that side. So I'm just going to check where we're at for time. I think I've got a couple of minutes left. And what we'll probably look at now is just maybe one more thing in Auth0 side, and that's going to be this rules section. There's some information in the JSON Web Token that's coming back for my user that I've augmented here. And one of the cool features about Auth0 is that you've got this rules engine, which is going to effectively intercept requests that come in to authenticate users and run some custom logic that you might want to provide. And what makes this really powerful is you can start to do things where you make external requests maybe to another service. You can log some data from the user's authentication transaction. You can send it to another logging service, for example. You can make outside requests. You can work with data that's present within this the context of your user. And that's what I'm doing here is I'm taking the roles for a user and putting it on that roles key, roles claim rather. I'm also taking a user ID that comes from my my backend, from my database, and I'm putting that onto the access token so that we can use it at the API. So lots of different ways that you can play with this, lots of different things you can do. And people often ask me, like, would I recommend Auth0? Would I, recommend something else? I think, the fact that we've got so many third-party Auth0 or third-party authentication services is great. There's a lot that we can do to save time. There's a lot that we can do to be confident that our applications are more secure, because it's the job of these companies to make sure that security is really tight. I recommend Auth0 because it is probably the best one that I've seen around. I've spent a lot of time playing with different services. Auth0 is probably the most flexible one I've seen. So even though I don't work there anymore, I definitely still recommend it. If you're using Nexus, so we haven't touched on Nexus today. That's the GraphQL stuff that Prisma takes care of. We've got Nexus schema, Nexus framework. If you're into a code-first GraphQL API and you want to use Auth0, there's a plugin that allows you to do that with Nexus, and it's really cool. Like it helps you to do this really quickly. So you can come over here to Nexus plugin Auth0. Plugs right in. You can do the same kind of thing that we've just seen, protecting your GraphQL APIs. So I think I've probably been talking for long enough. One thing I'd point you to if you want to know more on this kind of thing is I've got this course. You can go to reactsecurity.io. We talk about Auth0. We talk about GraphQL APIs and protecting them, securing them, etc. So I invite you to come check out all of this content if you are interested. There's a whole module on third-party authentication providers, including Auth0. And once again, that's at reactsecurity.io. You can reach me on Twitter. Please do. This would be great it would be great to hear from you on Twitter. I'm at Ryan Chenkie on Twitter, right there. And come say hi. Again, I'm at Prisma now, so I'll interact with you about Prisma stuff, about security stuff, anything you want to talk about. And with that, I suppose we can probably take some questions now, Daniel.
Okay, Ryan, thank you so much for that. That was really insightful. I learned a bunch of things. One of the things I guess I had as a question was how important, what do you use audiences for with Auth 0?
Yeah, so I kind of skimmed over that, but in the API section of the Auth0 dashboard, there is this spot where you specify a name, an identifier for your API. And you want to have that as your audience because you want to say that your JSON web tokens, your access tokens, should only be allowed to be consumed at certain places. So if you have multiple different APIs and you are authorizing users from one central location, and you want user A to be only to be able to access API A and user B, API B, etc., you would set up a different audience for them. And you would say that in their JSON web tokens that they have a certain audience. And then once they're, then once they send their tokens to the APIs, the audience is verified. And that means that user A can't access user B's API, that kind of thing.
So it's like kind of a way to segment, a hierarchical segmentation. So you have an app, and an app can have multiple audiences. And so that's something you would use in the context of, say, an app that has multiple sort of APIs or...
Yeah, you can sort of think of it in some of those terms. I mean, audience, like as a term, comes from it comes from OAuth. Like that's something that you'll see in OAuth, and it's one of the parameters that like needs to be present when you're doing OAuth type work. But yeah, you can kind of think of it as like segmenting your API, excuse me, segmenting your API so that it's only accessible by certain access tokens.
Great. And we have some questions coming in. I guess you've addressed the question of using from Sean Grove. How do you feel? Okay, do you feel the shield approach is easier, more secure compared to custom auth directives on the schema?
So is it easier, more secure? I think it's easier. Definitely easier. I can't speak necessarily to the security aspect of it because I haven't thoroughly dug in, nor have I seen like too many things security-wise, if it's like a better approach or not. But I think that if you're using custom directives, you're going to be setting up the rules and how all of that works on your own. You're going to be needing to do things like taking in the AST, the GraphQL AST, and walking that and marking off, using information in it to mark off certain fields as accessible based on certain conditions. There's a lot of work to do there to verify that everything is working correctly. So perhaps if you want an easier time, go with Shield, and you might end up more secure anyway.
Thank you for the question, Sean Grove. Okay, and we'll take maybe one last question. Does Prisma GraphQL currently support end-to-end encryption for the API responses?
Well, the end-to-end encryption piece, I think, would be more closely tied to your deployment, like your network. You would, and it depends exactly what you mean by end-to-end encryption too. But yeah, like if you're talking about end-to-end encryption, like request comes in, it's encrypted, and then maybe if it's going to a load balancer and then to like a compute resource encrypted along that path as well. That's more something on like the networking side of wherever you're deploying to. But yeah, you're not going to be prevented from doing that in your GraphQL API if you set that up properly wherever you're deploying to.
Right. Okay. We're about to wrap up. I'd like to thank you so much, Ryan, for the insightful talk. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the next talk too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So we now have Jesse Martin from GraphCMS. Let's get your label correct. Hey, Jesse. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, good. Everybody's
great.
still sticking with us?
Great. So you're going to be, I'll give it a short introduction. So you're a developer advocate and solutions architect at GraphCMS, where you teach developers and enterprise clients how to embrace headless architectures and leverage the best parts of GraphQL. Your hobbies are spending time with your wife and your 3 kids, building products and teaching. So I really hope we can learn from you today.
I hope so too. Let's get my screen sharing going here real quick. So I'm going to grab the window.
Cool.
All right. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen now. Is that correct? Okay. I'm assuming that's correct. I can see my own screen, so that must be the case. Yeah, so first of all, try to ignore everything up here at the top of my screen. I have been called out many times for my overuse of these widgets. Just try not to let it bother you for this talk. What I'm going to do is kind of do a quick walkthrough of some different features and show you basically the new GraphCMS. So we've been working for quite a few years now on revamping our approach to how people work with the CMS and everything else around this space, specifically for a GraphQL native CMS. And we're just super excited to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get kicked off here and get going pretty quick. So basically, this is the only slide I have tonight. This is who I am. This is where you can find me online, is at Motley Dev on Twitter. That's also what I have for GitHub. I do work for GraphCMS. This is basically in my opinion, because I work there, the most GraphQL complete CMS out there. So if you really like GraphQL, there really is, in my opinion, no better CMS to work with to get all of the benefits of GraphQL. There's a lot of great ones out there that are trying to solve similar problems, but I want to show you tonight why I think GraphCMS is doing a really great job and how you can really get up and running and really getting started with GraphQL in probably the fastest way possible. So what we're going to do, and before I hop over to the first part of the application, I wanted to leverage a little bit from the last speaker's talk. Auth0 is a fantastic service if you're wanting to integrate Auth0 in any kind or authentication, any kind of a tool. I really recommend it as well. I just released as well a recent project here, GCMS Hazura Fit, where I combine Hazura with GraphCMS, but use Auth0 as the driving layer for all of my authentication and all the authorization. So I would definitely check it out. I'll be publishing these on Dev2 here in the next 1 or 2 days, but the guide is entirely online. So you can come in here and find a rather in-depth article on setting up the entire stack. So if you're into long form reading and tutorials and Auth0, definitely check it out. All right, so this is GraphCMS, the new interface where you start your application. So we have a couple of starters here, a couple of basic ones that you can work with. I'm just going to create a really simple schema to kind of show you how quick to get started. And then I'm going to show you a bit more of a complete example of what we can actually create with that. So I'm going to just do a blank one here. So I'm going to go to create new project. And I'm going to call mine GraphQL Berlin. And I want to choose the Frankfurt cluster because this is closest to where I am. And that just means that my interface will be stored in this region, which makes it a little bit faster for me to be able to work with the application. Everything I'm going to show you tonight is going to be available in our completely free developer account. So don't worry about the paid plans. Feel free to choose a developer account. If you have some business needs or whatever else, we're happy to have you pay. But we have free forever developer plans. So again, really a fantastic way to get started with GraphQL. I'm going to invite members later on, so we'll skip this step for now. And I have my dashboard where I'm able to now see exactly what I want to do to get started. So first step, we're going to go ahead and start building a schema. And I'm assuming there's a lot of basic understanding about what GraphQL is in a GraphQL meetup, so I'll skip over the basics there. But we're going to go ahead and define our types, which we call models. So I'm going to just represent a very simple, author blog kind of concept here. We'll go ahead and go with the author name here. And I'm going to go ahead and say create the model. I could set up a preview URL at this point, but I'm going to skip that for now. I'm going to go ahead and say create the author model. And we're going to go ahead and provide a name. And I'm going to use that name as the title field. This just means that when I have a relationship later on, I'm able to see that. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, but I'm going to go ahead and add my second model here called the post, or we'll just call article in this case. So I have article and author. And what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and build a simple relationship between these. And I've used a lot of different tools out there. I'm going to put this actually on article instead. I've used a lot of different tools out there, and there's a lot of really great ones. I am convinced, and I'm proud of it, I'm very convinced that there is no faster way to build a many-to-many relationship than inside of GraphCMS. So I'm going to do this. We're going to say a many-to-many relationship. Multiple authors can be part of the same article, and multiple authors can be, an author can write multiple articles. So it's many to many, and to set that up in most other tools requires quite a bit of amount of boilerplate. But here we can simply just go ahead and call this authors. Allow multiple values. We're going to attach the author to this field here. I gave it this plural name so that my field is consistent, semantically correct. I'm going to go ahead and configure the reverse side, and I'm going to say that I can also have multiple articles, allow multiple values as well. Go ahead and create that. And now I have a many-to-many relationship between authors to articles, which is, I think, absolutely fantastic. If I go to article here, I'm going to give it a quick title as an example here. I will use that as a title field. I want to demonstrate what that does here 1 minute. And we're going to use the developer's favorite, a markdown field for the content. And what I do at this point is I'm going to go ahead and just change this order because I think that's a little bit nicer. Let's go ahead and add some content in there. So we're going to say the article, make a new post here called, we'll just say, hello, GraphQL Berlin. And then the content will be, I hope you enjoy this talk. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new author here real fast. I'm going to add myself. I'm going to save and just publish it right away. I could also just save it, but I'm going to just save and publish. I now have it connected, and you'll see that my name here shows up underneath the reference. This is that title field functionality. So we're able to surface that as a easy to view field. So I'm going to go ahead and save and publish. And now I have an article and I have an author. There's a lot of native CMS kind of primitives that you would expect. So let's say, for example, I wanted to have a special view here. If I go back out and I say, okay, go ahead and get me all of the articles where the title has the, I don't want to search for the word title. What I want to do is say, get me all the fields title where it contains the word, well, we'll just say hello. And I'll call this a friendly articles. Create. So custom views, really nice features. We have a lot of great functionality as well. So let's say we go back to this author here, and I want to go ahead and say that I want to grab, let's say, their Twitter handle. That's kind of a comment that you might want to store. But I want to enforce that my content editors only ever actually, it's restricted, right? So I want to go ahead and say, we're going to use a match a specific pattern in this case. So we're going to say that this actually has to be a special regex pattern. So we'll say something like it has to start with a @ and then it's allowed any number of characters after that. I could get a bit more specific with the Twitter specifics. Oops, just clicked out of there. So starting with @ followed by any specific character pattern. And they'll say doesn't look correct for our custom error message. We'll go ahead and create that. Let's go back and update myself here as an author. And we'll just go ahead and we'll show the error here. So we'll say something like motley, and then it's not, that's not correct. So I come back here, add in the @ I can add in the correct fields. There's a load of really cool features that you can discover. We have a very powerful localization system. That's something that's available for paid plans. We can do a trial. Let me just show it to you. We can do a trial of it real fast. I'm going to go to locales, and just quickly upgrade for a quick trial here. If I go back to locales, let's say I want to support the German language underneath locales. I can go ahead and add in the proper Hochdeutsch format there. And if I come back over to my schema, I'm going to enable localization on my article in this case. So I'll say that on my title, I want to localize this field. And on my content, I want to localize that field as well. We're going to do a shortcut to go to content editing. In this case, we come over here. And now you'll notice that I can turn on my localizations and I have the ability to provide translations. I have learned a long time ago in developer relations, never attempt to do live translation services. So I'm just not going to go there, even though I've been in Germany for a while. But you can imagine a correct and properly formatted German text there. So we'll go ahead and skip that for now. I'm going to just go ahead and save this. We'll see now that you have the ability to view. There's a diff here now between the two, but we're going to go and skip that for now. And I'm going to just show you the built-in playground here. This is how you would query the content. So we'll just say, go ahead and get me my articles along with the title and the markdown, or I just called content in my case. And I want my authors, and I want their name and the Twitter handle. So we have really simple, native support for GraphQL. You can obviously filter as well. So you can do things like where statements and get down pretty granular. I want you to explore it. I'm not going to go into this too much more because I want to show you actually something else a bit more specific. So I'm going to end this part of the demo here. And we're going to hop over to the web app that we're going to actually be making a bit dynamic with GraphCMS. So I've created here a very, very simple website. I'm using the fantastic Tailwind UI library, worth every penny because it makes really nice looking websites very quickly. So highly, highly recommend. Anyways, I've got a very simple form here that's actually currently hooked up to GraphCMS. So this is dynamic. I want to show you how we might go about actually creating some other dynamic pieces here from the system. And we'll see how far we get here. So if somebody in the chat could also just message me what time I started, because I didn't actually note the time. So I want to make sure I'm being careful on how much time I actually have with you. So let's go ahead and look at the schema that's powering our website here. So under the schema here, we have a couple of models. We have a top-level form. We have a top-level page. We also have these different input types. We have a form checkbox. We have a form input. We have a form option. Let's go ahead and look at the form select here. So we have the name. We have the label that might be used for the form. We have the required status as a Boolean value. We have the ability to attach options. They follow a very similar pattern all throughout. So again, name, we have a type. We have so very similar pattern. This is what we're going to use to generate an HTML form. So very, very standard values here. Then we have this page here. And we're going to actually be tracking submissions as well inside of GraphCMS because, again, like I said, we support the full specification of GraphCMS. We also support mutations. And that's one of the things that I think sets us out a little bit more unique is the ability to actually create content back in the CMS using the same GraphQL API that you learn from the query side, which is a very nice functionality. So something that we're pretty excited about. We'll take a look at that in a minute here as well. Let's go ahead and see what we have connected. So if we go to the page here under our content, so under page, we have the ability to show the contact page. I have a simple title here. I have a contact, and then I have an attached form. And if I come down into the form itself, what we have here, and I'm going to just assume that I should probably bump that resolution. So let me just zoom in a little bit here without crowding my screen. It might be a little bit easier for you to. We'll try that, see if the UI stays happy with me with that. So what we have now is underneath the form itself, we have the label, we have the for what's called request form, and then we have the connected submissions to it, and we have the submission label. And here's something really interesting. So what we have now is we have different kinds of forms attached underneath this one field. And this is actually a really powerform functionality of GraphQL called union types, which allows you to have a mixed type. And so if I look at the actual form here, and I look at the fields, you'll see that it actually supports a little drop down for my zoom in there. You'll see that I have basically a reference to multiple values here. I have the form select, the form input, the form text area, the form checkbox. I'm able to mix and match all of my types here in a really powerful way. So if I come here back to my actual form again, we'll just go directly to the form and edit it here. So I have name, email, all this stuff, and I can also change the order. So here we've got, name and email address. Well, if I were to change, say, the order here, and we just publish that here real quick, and we go, see, I have a submission already there when I was testing it earlier. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and we'll see that now I have it switched where I have email on top and name on the bottom. So I'm able to dynamically drive these elements on my page, which is a really powerful concept, especially if you're trying to onboard a marketing department. You can really map exactly what the design spec and the language of the landing pages is supposed to be to these content types that give your content editors the ability to drag and drop and sort exactly the way you want it to be. My start time was 7:08 German time. I'm also in German time, so that's perfect. Thank you, Joshua. All right, let's go back to here now. So what we have is really interesting is this ability. What I'm going to do now is say, how would I actually go about updating this content here? So this content is currently not, it's not dynamic at all. So I'm going to go over and hop into my code for a minute. This is the page that gets represented here. And this is from Next.js. If you're not familiar with Next.js, it's an extremely powerful framework for JavaScript developers. It allows you to combine the best of static rendering versus server rendering and client-side rendering. It really is the Swiss Army knife of basically any kind of framework needs you might have. What I've got here is this primitive that just says, okay, get static props, which means go ahead and run this query for each page that is going to be attempted to be built. Down below, I tell it what to actually do. So it says, please do a GraphQL query for all my pages. All I need is the slug in this case. And then when it tries to make paths from the slug on each of those pages, it'll run this query, which in this case, what it does is it says, okay, grab me the page where the slug matches the one that I pulled down below, grab the title, the slug, the form, and on the form, when we come to that fields part, we're able to do the inline fragments of our different types, right? So we're able to say, when it's a form input, I need this data. When it's a form text area, I need this data. And it grabs all of this content all the way down and pumps it into a typical React rendered page here. Now, this is a bit more messy because I was just copying and pasting a lot from the UI library without actually breaking it into very many nice components. But what we're going to do is try to create a content primitive to represent this section right here. So what I'm going to do is say, I want to have a title and I want to have a subtitle for my page on my hero. So I'm going to come over to my editor here, and I'm going to go ahead and go to my page, and I'm going to simply say, oops, that's actually creating content, not creating schema changes. We're going to go back to my page here, and I'm going to say I want to have a hero title, and I'm going to say that I also want to have a multi-line text for a hero subtitle. There's a lot of ways you can model this with GraphCMS. I often will do a content block, which then gives you a Slate AST object in response. I don't have the time to go into rendering a Slate AST to the page tonight, but that would be another very powerful primitive as well. Say I have a content block, that's a rich text type. My content editors can add bold and italics and all these kind of details. And that would be a really fantastic way to go about it. For the sake of time tonight, I'm simply going to go with this hero title, hero subtitle. Let's just go ahead and pull this up real quick to the top so we have it nice and accessible. I could also add in I'll do it. I'm going to add in the hero CTA. I have a lot of content out there about data modeling and how to do that in a clean, validated way. Let's just, again, throw a quick validation pattern on that. So we'll say that it needs to start with only HTTPS, with only secure content. I am going to not be happy with myself if I do it that way because of regex. Let's go ahead and catch that before we have it yelling at us. That should be correct. And for the sake of speed and not futzing around with it, I want to just say that. Okay, so we just tell it has to be a link for this field. Go ahead and create that. And now I have a hero CTA attached as well. So if I go back to my page now on the content editing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hello, GraphQL Berlin. Nice to see you. Even though I can't really see you, which is the one part I dislike about all of this remote stuff the most. I hate missing being with the community there. And we're going to go ahead and put in, I think this was actually something about jobs. So we're going to just say jobs.graphcms.com. And we'll go ahead and save and publish that page. What we're going to do now is go back over to here. And so we're going to hop over into the code. We're going to search for where this piece is being used. So we're going to say data to enrich your online business. Let's come up to our page query here. And we're going to just ask for this additional data. So we're going to say hero title, hero subtitle. I'm really getting careful here because I could really easily mess up my my process. So we'll say hero subtitle and hero CTA. I think I did that with the capitalization. Let's come down here to the page. And what we have is the page query is responded. The form is being read off of there. But what I need is to go ahead and pull off as well the hero title, hero subtitle, and hero CT. I'm getting really brave here with expecting nothing to error on me. So I've got my hero title first. Let's go ahead and test that. And it's just down here to something about, yeah, so we'll just go ahead and remove this piece here and render this out to the page. See if the live coding will play with me here. So something is unhappy. Make sure I publish that. I believe I did. And what's nice as well is that if we get in a situation here where it doesn't actually render, we can always test that query here. Oh, yeah, it's working. It's working. Very good. So hello, GraphQL Berlin. And we're going to go ahead and put in the subtitle here. And up above there was our CTA. So we're going to just put this right up here in the value for that. I already tested this earlier, so not everything is fly by the seat of the pants. Hero CTA. Let's go ahead and test this here. Nice to see you. And the link is also dynamic as well. So I have dynamic content. I took the design that came from my design department. I have a cut HTML out of it. And now I've hooked it up to a CMS where my marketing department could totally take over from this point, which is super valuable. What I want to do here real fast then is show how I might be able to customize this form here. So we have, name, email address, and we have a select field here. What I want to do is say, how would we go about maybe adding more data to this form? So let's go back and customize that. I'm going to go to my form itself now. And I'm going to go ahead and modify this and say that I want a name, an email. Let's say I want to capture an address in this case. So I'm going to say favorite front-end frame. I will leave that for now. Okay, so we'll say create a new document. I'm going to use a text area. So this is not validation specific friendly, but we'll say go ahead and say form text area. And I will say something to the effect of address. And then we'll say something like, who knows? No, not even going to go there. We're just going to go with the address for now. And we'll make this a required field. I'm going to go ahead and save and publish that. And I made a text area so somebody could just type in a full field, because there's so many variables when it comes to capturing an address. So we have like a name and an email, and we have an address. I'm going to drop I'm going to leave the message here and leave this as well. Let's go ahead and see how this looks. Let's save and publish that and go to our field here. And so now we should have an address in there. And yeah, we have it now. We have a name, we have email address, we have address, we have some funny questions we can ask people, which is kind of fun. But I think we can kind of take this up to another level, where I think I actually had promised everybody a surprise for tonight. So let's go ahead and modify this a little bit more so I can see if I can make this even more contrived. Let's say that I happen to have a TOC that happens to be like more standardized. So let's go ahead and add an existing one here. So I'm going to go ahead and say I need a new input here, new checkbox. Yeah. And I'm going to use this one. This one seems like it's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this other one. I don't agree to everything, but I agree to something more specific. So I'm going to go ahead and save and publish that. And we're going to go ahead and come up here and refresh here, see how that looks. Okay, so this one says, I agree to the terms of service and verify that the information provided is accurate, giving GraphCMS GmbH permission to send me postage on the address given. Like, what kind of stuff would GraphCMS be giving? So we could come back to this page here, and we could kind of like change this a little bit to something like free stickers, an exclamation on that, and we'll say like, sign up at the form to the right, and we'll send you free stickers. And five lucky entrants will get a free t-shirt. Let's save and publish that. Let's just see what happens. And if we go ahead and we look at this page here, let's see how that looks. So it says free stickers, sign up at the form to the right, and we'll send you free stickers, and 5 lucky entrants will get a free t-shirt. I'll need a name. I will need your email address in case everything else goes sideways. I'll need an address, and you can answer these completely pedantic but fun questions. And yeah, let's go ahead and check this out here real quick, because if I go to, I need to trigger a new build here on Versal, which is where I have this deployed, because it's a static build. It's not a dynamic build. Let's redeploy that, and pretty soon this is going to be live for everybody. So let's go ahead and build this. If I can figure out how to do deploys. All right, redeploy. So let me show you the URL here. This is the page. I'm bringing it over to the other page here. So in a few minutes, this page is going to be finished with its redeploy. And the new information will be live. You can go to GraphQL Berlin-surprise, fill out the form. I will get it. So you are giving me permission to your data. You need to check the little box. And yeah, we'll send you free stickers and free content. So that is part of just how amazing it is with GraphCMS, the ability to work with mutations. So I can use these submission forms to be able to put content back in my CMS. It becomes so much more than just a content management system. It becomes actually a product management platform. It becomes a tool for rapidly building proof of concepts and putting things together and being able to reuse this content in multiple places. I can take these submissions and I can put them inside of a fulfillment order form or something or automate a printing service from this data, because this is all headless and disconnected from a simple one website. I can reuse this data anywhere that I would want. That's all I have. Let me check this deploy. Let's go and refresh the page. See if it's working. Otherwise, I'll have to flush the cache on it. And it looks like I have something a little funny there. So I will update this by the time the questions are over. But that is what I have for you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jesse. That was really wonderful. It's my first encounter with GraphCMS. I mean, I've heard a lot about it, so it was nice to see it in action. You ready to take some questions? Let's see if we have any questions.
Let's fire it away, yeah.
All right. Well, we have nothing coming in.
That's good. They're so amazed.
Yeah, I guess that means everyone's going to be using GraphCMS, no problems. So do you have the repository for the example that you could maybe share in case anyone's interested?
I can paste it. It's going to need to be made public first. Let me just see if it's already public. I can do it right now while any first questions might come in.
So essentially, GraphCMS is not just a CMS; it's also a backend of sorts due to the form submission functionality that it has.
Yeah, and it's not just form submission. So it's any kind of an API-driven experience. So you can write any kind of content to it. Doesn't have to be through a form. Doesn't have to be through anything else. You can really write any mutation statement that you can think of. You can write that into GraphCMS.
And what kind of authentication strategies does it support? I mean, assume that submissions would be a publicly exposed thing, but it would sort of only allow it from certain origins.
Yeah, so we use bearer auth token. So you can be able to define something that says this allows mutations, this does not allow mutations, this will read content from draft, this will read content from our published, and anything else that you would want to have available there. I think I have it now with the URL. Let me just check this real quick. So I will get that online and tweet it out. So go follow me on Twitter, and I will definitely publish that once I think I have a cache problem that's getting in the way of the build. But
the nature of static builds.
Well, we can also do it this way. We can also just tweak this real quick and just push the new deploy trigger from here. So we'll just do this as well. Well, I have a new I think that's because I haven't pushed the code yet. It's dynamic. That's also the other part of it, is you have to actually push the do it live. You have to actually push the code up to the server when it's supposed to make changes. So we'll give it a minute there. Yeah, it's an amazing tool, and the free account that are there for developers, it's just incredibly generous. It has webhooks included. I didn't even go into webhooks tonight, but we have free webhooks on all the developer plans, so you can trigger all kinds of builds and deploys with that as well. Yeah.
So for a given project, you can have the hooks being called by GraphCMS to whatever backend you're using to rebuild, essentially.
Yeah. Or trigger a Slack hook. So anytime I get a submission, I can update Slack and say, hey, new request, anything of that nature. Yeah.
Great.
Just checking to see if this repo is already live, that I can drop it already. Let me just check the status.
All right. And then Marcel asked a question. Is the source of the sample available? I'm interested how the form is dynamically updated by GraphQL's over GraphCMS. So I assume that's you'll be sharing that.
I will. I'll also take a quick moment to point out the inspiration for a lot of this was from one of my coworkers. So if we do Versal, Next.js, GitHub, or say dynamic form. So Jamie Barton, one of my coworkers, created this Dev2 article. So if you want, by the time that I get the other one published, this one here is where I got a lot of inspiration from as well for the talk tonight. Jamie works at GraphCMS as well, but this is a very thorough walkthrough that gives you all the details as well about creating the form. It doesn't include the styling from Tailwind, so it's a bit more pure even, but it talks through the content model, it talks through how to set it up, what the benefits of union types, collecting forms. So this is also a very fantastic way to get caught up to speed as well. So I'll drop this link for the starter. I don't think I'm logged in, so I will.
You can send it to me and I'll share it in the...
I will send it to you, yeah, and then you can pass that on.
And it looks like the website has been deployed. I've got the address input on GraphQL-Berlin-surprise.versal.app. I've also shared that URL via the comments, via the chat.
Very good. You always have to push the code live. It's just how it works.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And then we got the Dev2 articles. So this is for you, Marcel, or anyone else interested in rendering essentially dynamic forms based on GraphCMS state.
Exactly.
Cool. So on that note, do you have any final words to say before we wrap up?
No, just find me on Twitter. I'll do or follow GraphCMS even. We drop lots of resources and tutorials. We're also always excited to see what the community's doing. So if you have something you want to show off, we're happy to give that some push from our side. We have a long history with Prisma, and we've always really appreciated the GraphQL thought leadership you guys have provided. So really appreciate you having us on tonight.
Great. Well, it's been wonderful having you. And on that note, I'd also like to invite you, if you're listening to this on YouTube, most likely hit the subscribe button. We have a lot of upcoming streams where we share more about what we're doing at Prisma and a lot of different content on sort of different use cases for Prisma. So Prisma is often associated with GraphQL, and while it is great for GraphQL purposes, the sort of spectrum of possibilities with Prisma is really broad, and this is something that we're trying to sort of do a lot more on, and deliver content on to really expand the sort of understanding of what Prisma is. So yeah, we'll wrap up. I'll bring Stefano shortly on just to say a goodbye. Stefano, thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Jesse. It's been a great meetup, and I really enjoyed your talks. All right. Well,
Thank you.
on that, have a good afternoon.